There we go. Okay. And we'll put the recording up on the Facebook forum, so comrades who aren't here, can't be here for work or other reasons. Some people, of course, have got time zone problems as well, haven't they? All right, so we're not going to have an intro for this session, because we thought this is not a subject where only a few people have got some specialist knowledge. I'm sure most of us have all been following what's been happening in Ukraine and the invasion of Ukraine by the Russians, and we'll have an opinion about it, or questions about it, or knowledge about it. So I don't see a reason we need to have an intro. I think it'd be much better to have a sort of free-for-all discussion, and we don't need to be too formal. If it does get out of hand, I'll try to act like a chair. Obviously, this issue does raise, a lot of passions and emotions, and it's very, there's a lot of potentially controversial points of view. So, obviously, appeal to the comrades to express themselves, in a comradely way, and not to question, the values of each comrade, because I think we're all coming from the point of view of wanting to see the best for the people of Ukraine, Russia, etc., etc. So it's really a question that we might have differences because where we're based in the world, what our political analysis is, what's the angle that's most motivating on these things. But bear that in mind, that's the point of this, isn't it? That we don't expect everybody to have the same point of view, and by us expressing these different angles and perspectives, then hopefully we all learn from this and get a better result. Okay, so who's the first comrade who would like to chip in? Maybe Themos, as you've got to leave, is there a chance you can say a few words? And we all saw that interesting statement you put up on the Facebook forum. Perhaps you want to explain a little bit in case people haven't read it.
Well, or just a few words because, as I said, somebody's picking me up very soon.
Okay.
What we think is that the situation in Ukraine is not really the situation in Ukraine. It's the situation in the whole world. It's a world clash, and it's not a Russian versus Ukraine. It's versus Ukraine. I think it's Russian capitalism versus American capitalism mainly, and the clash of America and China. That's what is on the cards. What happens there, I think, is it will help to see it through the analysis of learning about imperialism. It's the clash between imperialist powers, really, because that's the background we have to realize. The second thing I want to say is that we shouldn't get bogged down in the details from the news, because neither Russia nor the West is saying anything that is remotely near the truth of what's happening. So they are just trying to pump up emotions in their favor, and we should be very, very careful of what we reproduce as facts. We don't know about that. So starting from there, I think we should say that we should be unequivocal in the condemnation of the invasion. I mean, Putin's invasion is a very brutal invasion, not as brutal as Syria, by the way, because they have been very careful. They are not indiscriminately bombing, and that's not by chance. They want to get some goals themselves, and I think they're overstating the sentimental aspects of people dying and children being displaced, and the blocks of flats being bombed is not the issue. Having said this, we should also expose the hypocrisy of the US, which in fact they pushed Ukraine into provoking Russia really, and airing this NATO the NATO entry of Ukraine. And when things became back, they left them in the lurch to face Putin's army and suffer the consequences. And also we should realize the importance of Europe. I mean, they just surrendered to the American narrative, to the American attempt to revive NATO, and regain their supremacy in the capitalist world of the West. I think I shall leave it at that because
I think that's your pick. That sounds like your pickup call, doesn't it, Themos? Okay, well, Themos, unfortunately, Themos has had to go to a meeting. So, Themos, if you can mute yourself, that would be great. Yeah. Okay. All right. So we had that was good, wasn't it? That was a cacophony. We had bells and dogs barking. That was something else, wasn't it? Yeah. Well, thanks very much, Themos. Shame you couldn't have talked a bit longer, but never mind. Next comrades who'd like to come in. And what I'm going to do, by the way, is a little warning. I'm going to try and call every comrade at some point to give us their point of view. It doesn't matter if it's short or long. All right. So who would like to volunteer? Don't be backward in coming forward, okay? All right, well, perhaps if it's okay, perhaps I can call in Boyan, as Boyan is based in Poland, and Boyan's running the barricade on the barricades video channel, and so they're getting the chance to interview lots of different people and getting information and perspectives from that. Boyan, would you be happy to come in and say a few words?
I would be very happy to do that, but you got to give me another 5 minutes. I got to reach my place. I'm still moving, okay? And the reception is not so great, but within literally 5 to 7 minutes, I'll be there, and I'll gladly join the discussion and give you, some views from Poland. All right?
Okay. All right, then let me go to Stefan, because I know Stefan's got, if he's there, he's got care responsibility, so he might get called away. Stefan, are you on the line?
Yes, I'm on the line.
Could you before you get interrupted, is it possible you could give us your thoughts on the situation in Ukraine?
Oh yes, some thoughts. Yeah, this is not just a clash between Ukraine and Russia, but also between East and West, that is NATO and Russia. And from our point of view here in Sweden, if I mean, of course, many are very upset, and the loudest voices are those who want to join NATO now. That is, Sweden should join NATO now. And also Finland should join NATO, I think. I mean, Finland has fought 2 short wars in the Second World War. They're in their part of the world. fought against Russia, and they managed very well too. They, as they say, they came in on a very good second place in that war. So, but up to now, Finland has always balanced between been acting very careful not to upset the big neighbor beyond their eastern border, and to join NATO was never an option. But now some voices, not only here in Sweden, but in Finland, talking about joining NATO. And I think all of this will be very dangerous, and there should be a clear line between holding that line clear, not that Ukraine or Sweden or Finland should join NATO, because where should that lead to? Can't come anything good out of it. But of course, the majority, me too, think that it's, yeah, Ukraine were attacked, and they have their right to defend themselves, and we should support that. Also, Sweden has supported Ukraine in a more material way by sending them 5,000 of our what's the name? It's shoulder one shot, shoot and throw away, shoulder cannons, so to say. And what do you think, comrades? Is that all right if we want to maintain neutrality? Is it all right to go so far to send materially help with war? Yeah. Oh, I'm too bad to find the words in English, but you know what I understand.
Sure.
We send them material for fighting the war.
Yeah. So you're raising the question. I guess sending humanitarian aid is one thing, but send weapons is breaking away from Sweden's traditional neutrality.
Yeah.
Questioning that, right? I know tomorrow the Swedish comrades are having a meeting to talk about Ukraine. Have you had any feedback from what the other comrades are feeling by talking to them?
Yeah, well, I think that they have the same opinion as I have, and most of the Swedes' opinion that we should send well, the Ukrainians have the right to defend themselves, and we support that, and we give them some help. The question about sending weapons, we are divided. I mean, not a big divide, but
sure. It'll be,
well,
Stefan, it'll be good if you give us some feedback after your meeting tomorrow. That'll be good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Perhaps you can feed into the meeting some of the points here that comrades raised. Yeah. That would be brilliant. Okay. All right, so I don't know if Boyan, you're ready.
Yeah, I'm
for
back.
us?
I'm back. So
go
if
for
you
it.
want me to intervene, right? I don't really know where to start. I mean, there are so many things happening and so many reactions, which are even worse oftentimes than the actual things that are happening. The war is obviously a horrific event, and for us in Eastern Europe, it has been a major trauma. I'm talking. I'm not exaggerating here. I'm not trying to be demagogic. It's just a very, very sad moment for us to see, particularly that the war theater is playing out again in our region, here in our region, and it's again because the big powers are playing their games and so on and so forth, and we're paying the full price, which is something, by the way, that some more meaningful elements of the Eastern European left, there aren't many, but still, to give them their credit where credit's due, they were worrying about this, that whatever happens, we want to support this side or the other side, whatever, we're going to pay the full price, we're going to get kicked by both, and this is precisely what's happening right now. I don't even want to start talking about like the prices going up through the roof, all the rest of it, like the price of gasoline, the price of bread, the price of gas. This is something, this is the pain we're enduring right now. We're beginning to endure that, and I'm absolutely sure it's going to get much, much worse than it is now. So, personally, what I'm trying to do is I'm sort of, trying to reformat my psychology, that from now on, we're going to be living in not only in a different world, but we're going to live through a long crisis for sure. So we're going to be poor. We're going to be very poor again. So that's one thing. Second thing I can tell you about Poland. Poland is a pretty, I think, a pretty peculiar place on the map of Eastern Europe, and the same goes for Ukraine, by the way, and Georgia, and well, Georgia is not exactly in Europe, territorially speaking, but politically speaking, and Romania. I mean, those are countries that you can somehow compare in terms of their political culture, in terms of the orientation of their political elites. They have always been super pro-NATO, pro-Western, America, and so on and so forth. And now those countries those elites are used to do some subversion for the Americans, against the Russians, or against the Russians and the Chinese, or against the Eastern emerging powers. And this is why the kind of game that is being played between, at least that's the interpretation of some people whose opinions I trust, this game that is being played between the Pentagon and between the State Department in America, where the State Department clearly wants to go for some kind of confrontation, for some kind of hot war with Russia on the Ukrainian territory, to turn it into a proper proxy war, something that they know how to manage, and the Pentagon trying to restrain all those people, saying that, come on, I mean, it's crazy, we're going to end up having in nuclear tombs or something like that. And that's why you get all those idiotic stories, idiotic ideas being shuffled every once in a while, like the MiG-29 fighter jets starting from Poland, with Ukrainian pilots flying to Ukraine or over Ukraine to fight the Russian the Russian army, the Russian Air Force. That was dismissed, thank God, but it might come back. Like now I can see, or I can actually read, I haven't seen yet, the presentation that Zelensky gave to the Congress, I think to the House of Representatives, where he clearly, demanded that there is a no-fly zone over Ukraine, which essentially means World War III. I'm sorry for using this worn-out cliche already, but yeah, that's pretty much what he's calling for. That's the attitude also on of the big portion of the international media, on top of all those things, which are very dangerous, and with our local elite, so to say, playing their viceroy role, which is like, we're going to do anything that our handlers actually make us say or make us do.
All right, as long as there is some agreement there, because they want to make sure that, you know, they're not actually, I don't know, when they do something, they're not going against the will of the Pentagon or against the will of the Department of State or against the will of some other powerful institution, could be the CIA or whatever. So, you know, as long as some kind of consensus emerges on this thing, we could expect a major escalation, which is going to hit Poland terribly. Not only Poland, like Eastern Europe in general, but Poland. Let me tell you that we've got already one, and that's official statistics. I've seen that today in the morning. 1,800,000 and I think 800,027 refugees registered. Like, we're talking about those that were already counted. And I'm sure that, you know, the counting is in progress. I don't know how accurate this counting is, but I can bet my head that we're talking about at least 2.5 million people, all who have already crossed the border. Not all of them, of course, want to stay here. Many of them want to travel to Germany, to the Netherlands, to France, wherever they have like relatives or family or friends or something like that. But a lot of them are going to stay here because many are, and you know, I can see that. I mean, I can speak from some kind of empirical experience, like superficial as it might be, but those people have no idea where they are and what are they going to do here, and what is going to even, you know, be happening with them tomorrow, the day after, in 1 week time, in 1 month time. They are just all when you go to the railway stations, the biggest 3 railway stations in Warsaw, they're all covered with people sleeping there, okay? Like in sleeping bags, on suitcases and stuff like this. The state is doing pretty much nothing, although it's obliged to do certain things, and it's boasting about how, you know, the government, I mean, is boasting about how they are helping the refugees and so on and so forth. That's all BS, and it should be dismissed immediately. The only thing that is being delivered to those people as help is being delivered by volunteers, by NGO activists. And as much as I hate the NGO class activists here in Poland, I gotta tell you that they've done a great job, the only good job here, by, you know, putting at least the people that are the victims of this, or that are, you know, migrating, putting those people in touch with other volunteers who are, for example, I don't know, who are prepared to offer, if they have a spare room in their apartment, that they could, you know, get some accommodation, or they put them in touch with some entrepreneurs who own hotels or hostels or something like that. And part of their capacity is dedicated to supporting the migrants and so on. And you know, this is really a crisis that is getting out of hand before you know, our very eyes here in Poland, and it's a matter of maybe 2 or 3 months when we're going to see, on top of all those problems that I just very briefly discussed here, top of the iceberg, really. On top of that, we're going to have like a huge, unprecedented wave of anti-Ukrainian xenophobia and racism and, you know, whatnot. And the nationalists here, I mean, I'm talking the hardline nationalists. Some of them are even present in the Polish parliament. They're just waiting for that. They're already preparing the ground. You know, you can see how their propaganda is working. And, you know, of course, we have in the background of the whole of this thing an utterly incompetent government, a government which has this far right or ultra right, ultra conservative Catholic fundamentalist orientation, and they have no idea of politics. They don't understand what responsibility means, what kind of you know, perspectives, processes, complicated processes, let alone or things like, for example, you know, interests between different social classes or groups or whatever. They have no idea about politics whatsoever. The only thing they can do, and the only thing they kind of use as a kind of instrument to keep power, to stay in power for, they've been in power for 6 years now, is like disbalancing, the emotional disbalancing of the Polish society, and you know, to sort of exploit the Polish society emotionally. And they try doing that, but you know, this kind of strategy has a certain limits, and those are the limits. I mean, we've hit the wall right now. And you know, on the one hand, they want to get a lot of people from Ukraine to demonstrate to their masters how, you know, we're going to do anything you tell us, like we're going to get like 3, 5, 10 million Ukrainians if needed, and we're going to accommodate them here, and there's no problem with this. And of course, again, I mean, there are so many things that I would like to say, but it's obviously not possible within such a short the time framework. But I want to indicate one thing here, that, you know, it's some people, there are still intelligent people within the Polish public opinion, they already start seeing through that, because 2 or 3 months ago, we had this major quarrel on the Polish-Belarusian border, where where the Polish army was sent to protect that border against 2,000 unarmed migrants who wanted not even to stay in Poland, but to travel to Germany, at least the majority of them, and they wouldn't let them in. they would build a wall and so on and so forth, and it would be a major hysteria here. And now everything's okay, because as long as, you know, it's within the ideological framework of the Western jingoism and Western chauvinism, something that, you know, now Poland can somehow inhale, and they can get high on this, that they are part of the West, something that the Polish elites have always, you know, wanted to be recognized as that. I don't know whether they really are, but for sure they are now more useful than they used to be, for example, 10 years ago. And they're living through their moment of, you know, emotional upheaval and the kind of self-definition and self-identification as Western and so on and so forth. So the situation is absolutely out of control, or on the verge of getting absolutely out of control. And, you know, I don't know what exactly the situation is from that point of view in all the other Eastern European countries, but obviously, when it comes to the tendency of aligning themselves with the West, they are using that moment to exactly, you know, to make it clear where they are, and regardless of what their societies might think about it. And, you know, I come from Bulgaria, where the society has always been very friendly to Russia, and this is the case now. And you know, the leaders are still saying the same, you know, they're repeating the same mantra. No, against Russia, Russia bad, you know, we have to send weapons to Ukraine, and so on and so forth. And I want to tell you that I'm personally very, very worried that this could actually happen. I mean, they didn't manage with the MiGs, they didn't manage with the no-fly zone, but something is going to happen. And whether they're going to, I don't know, transfer some major amount of weapons, I'm not sure. I don't want to speculate about it, but I'm really afraid that if they do something really stupid, what is going to happen is we're going to have this war, you know, lasting for not 2 months or 3 months or whatever it's going to take, whatever the plan is, I don't know, but it could last for years. I mean, it could happen so that, you know, with such actions on the part of the West, we might end up with a Ukrainian war that is not going to end within our lifetimes. And I'm not talking a hot war that people are going to be shooting each other all the time, but it could be something like a frozen conflict that could be erupting anytime, and it's going to be even more difficult to control it than it is now. So the perspectives, in my opinion, are extremely bleak. And then there's a whole slew of other issues, like the attitude of the left, the bankruptcy of the left,
so Boyan, on that, I wonder if you can hold your fire, because I'd like to bring you back a bit later on.
Sure.
As
whenever
the discussion develops, and perhaps those points come up.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I were a bit chaotic, but
no,
I
know you were on the move. So, yeah, and just on the refugee side, I remember, the comrades might remember I was living in Turkey before, and after, the Erdogan invaded Syria, and also connected to that, there was a huge amount of Syrian refugees came to Turkey in their millions. Some of them used Turkey as a transit to go to Europe, but that's been stopped. And so we've now got between, I don't know, 3 to 5 million Syrians, and of course they were welcomed. They fitted in with the Turkish government's strategy, and he even gave them the vote so that they could vote for him in the last elections. But the whole situation has changed now, where unfortunately there's a lot of racism against Syrians now among probably the majority of Turks. And so that's a very interesting point you're making about how the Ukrainians who come to Poland, who are being welcomed with open arms, how that situation could drastically change over time. So I think that's a very interesting point I hadn't thought about. Very good. Unfortunately, though, a bit of a bleak perspective from Boyan there. Okay, so can I have another comrade who'd like to contribute? Who would like to come in? Let's see. What about Mike over in Guyana? Do you have any, Mike? You have any perspectives on the situation? How you see this situation in Ukraine? Either the background to it, how it's developing now, how you think it's going to turn out? Mike Rahman.
Well, I think it's the first time we have had a war. Well, that's not the first time, but in the intensity, I did enjoy Boyan emphasis on this. I understand what he's saying. We are faced here because I don't know if you know that we have a border issue with Venezuela. We are bordering to Venezuela, the historical problem. And every time the imperialists wanted to create a problem in Guyana, moving towards the left, they used to activate this dispute between Venezuela and Guyana. That's many years ago. But when Chavez came to power, the entire situation changed because he decided that he wasn't going to have a border dispute. He was going to have Bolivarian, broad-based, well, the entire South America, as you know, I don't want to go into that. Everybody knows about Chavez's philosophy. But what we find now, I don't know exactly what is going on in Venezuela in terms of what they're thinking. But I think everybody knows that there was a warplane that landed in Venezuela a week or 2 weeks ago. And that sending a message to the Americans that if you're going to play in my backyard, I'm going to play back in yours. So this has caused a lot of problems here because we have a government that was, funny enough, that the party in office was regarded as the Communist Party of Guyana, linked to the Soviet Union, was part of the Communist International. Everybody probably would know Dr. Jagan, who was the founder of that party. So what's happened now is that the guys who took over the party have gone completely on the right. And they were imposed by American imperialism, literally told the last government that if they didn't resign after they felt they lost the election, that they were going to impose sanctions and probably land troops. One of the reasons why they got rid of the last government was because the president refused to allow the Americans a military base in Guyana and to allow them to establish a television and radio station. You also may know that ExxonMobil actually is exploiting the oil resources, which is supposed to be, Guyana is supposed to be producing the best crude oil in the world. And we have an abundance of it, obviously. Venezuela is next door. So we are surrounded by oil countries. On the eastern side, we have Suriname, former Dutch colony, and on the southern side, you have the Caribbean with Trinidad and Tobago. So obviously, without going into any great detail about what is America's influence on, and it's very complicated, very complex to understand what they're trying to do. Because on the one hand, Biden came to office on the basis of a large section of the American young people who wanted climate change. And when he came into office, immediately reversed the license of those fossil fuel companies. But then he revoked it again. So it seemed to us that he's moving. He doesn't have a strategy. He's just moving from day to day. But the important point here about what is happening in Ukraine, what the Russians are doing in this region, is really stirring up a lot of uneasiness here. I have had a number of television programs here locally, social media programs, and the regime here has actually offered support to they didn't abstain. They actually voted with the Americans to call a boycott and sanction on Ukraine. So you can understand their position.
Oh, you mean on Russia? You mean on Russia, do you?
Against Russia, yes.
Yeah.
And the guy who is virtually the president, he studied in Moscow at the Lubimbo School in Moscow. So you can see how far, just like the Eastern European communists, they've shifted towards the right. So you get a better understanding of what we're dealing with. Then you have Cubans. Obviously, everybody who's following Venezuela knows that the Cubans are virtually controlling Venezuela. the Cuban president is supposed to be visiting Guyana. So there is a lot of that we still don't know, but we can speculate. So the war is not in Ukraine. It's not going to only going to escalate if it happens in that region, but also this part of the world, because the Russians have close connections. Everybody knows that with the Chinese. They have given the Venezuelans a huge amount of futures being paid for their oil before they have actually taken it. So they have an interest here. And so therefore, we don't know what to expect ourselves here. There are probably a number of questions I think we can put on the table for discussion, which is that what if the Americans were to do some foolishness, as Comrade Boyan said, in that part of the world, would Venezuela invade Guyana? Guyana doesn't have an army, really. So one shot they fired, everybody's down. So they will have to be dependent on the Americans to come here to actually defend Guyana. If Venezuela were to invade Guyana and the Russians were to drop a bomb in the waters of the city of the capital city of Guyana, the entire city would be flooded and hundreds of people, thousands of people would be dead. There is this frightening thought. I'll leave it at that for people to ask more questions or comment on it.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. I think you're bringing out. You can see how far these geopolitical ramifications of the action going on in Ukraine are spreading across the world, and how people are beginning to think that we're in a new era of warfare, isn't it? That's one of the sad results of this. Apart from the poor people of Ukraine, how they're suffering this situation, is that this invasion has, and we obviously need to talk about why the invasion happened, which is the mass media is not wanting to do that. But this invasion is obviously set off a carnival of reaction in many countries. So it's one of the sad sides of this, outcomes of this thing so far. Of course, that can all change as events move on. So, okay, what about, maybe we could have one of the Pakistani comrades come in to say what, how they're seeing this conflict. I don't know if Khalid or Sajjad or Kabir, one of the comrades. Okay, Khalid, go for it.
Yeah. Thanks, Pat, and I will be short. Our government is, our Prime Minister was in Moscow when Russia launched the attack on Ukraine. And since then, the Pakistani government is saying that they are neutral. They are, even in the UN vote, in the General Assembly, they abstained, and they didn't vote for America or with the Russians. And because this government is facing a political crisis at home, and I don't want to go into it, but so this government has built, because the opposition in Pakistan has moved a no confidence motion against the Prime Minister, and now the government is come up with the narrative, a political narrative they are now spreading out.
Khalid, I think you've gone offline there. Okay, so unfortunately, the comrades in Pakistan do suffer a lot. Brilliant, you're back. Brilliant. Khalid, we just lost you there. So if your connection comes back on better, I'll call you back. All right. The trouble is the electricity and the internet is very dodgy over there.
Yeah, they are saying that they have been targeted because they are anti-West, and they have taken a neutral position in this war. So that's now they are accusing that the opposition is supported by the West and the Americans. And so it's really interesting, how the different governments are using this war to justify their own domestic actions and their foreign policy, and how they are trying to twist the facts and all these things just to give them some political mileage. As far as this war is concerned, I think it's I agree with the comrades that this is aggression. Russia attacked Ukraine, but I think it's we need to see it in a bigger picture. The political struggle that is taking place at the moment, and between China and Russia on one hand, and some other country might join them in this whatever, Cold War 2 or whatever somebody like to describe it. But that is a new geopolitical struggle that has already started. It's intensifying with every passing day, and America, with the help of the West, with the European powers, they are trying to curtail the rising power of China. I think this war we need to, on the one hand, yes, we condemn, the Russian attack on Ukraine, but on the other hand, we can't really say that the Americans and the European powers did nothing, to lead up to that situation. I think they created the situation, and when Russia, Russia, I don't think, even though, the wars always bring destruction, for the people, it's ordinary people who really been the victims of a war. And the other thing that, when a war started, the first casualty is the truth. So it's difficult to find out what is really happening. But looking at what the Western media is doing, they have created this hype, and the war hysteria and all this now. And it's a very one-sided propaganda that is taking place. And, they are not discussing what has led to this war and what has happened, what the Americans did in the region, in that particular region, especially since 2 decades, and how they are trying to expand NATO and, want to increase their influence and all these things. And so I think, they also played a big role, what is happening now in Ukraine. And now, and I think I was listening to the Ukraine president, Zelensky, or whatever his name is. He was talking to his military commanders, and he said that the only viable position the Ukraine can take in this situation is to take a neutral position. And we can't become member of the NATO. And the NATO said that you are welcome. You can join the NATO now. They are saying you can't. And he said we have no other option than to give up this hope that we can become member of the NATO. And I think that is how they did use the media, the Western powers, to create that war hysteria and all that propaganda that is still going on. And but practically, they are, as Boyan said, I think, some section of the American ruling class did want to, to involve a bit, practically do something to counter the Russia. But I think, I don't think they are in a majority at the moment, or they are in a dominating position. So it's interesting struggle that is taking place between Pentagon and the State Department. So, it will be interesting how. But I think I raised it, The problem is, I think it's not really clear. Russia is, if we believe Russia, then it means Russia is making progress slowly. But I was watching a program yesterday, and one military expert was saying that war might end in in the end of April or the beginning of May. And that means there will be more suffering for the Ukraine people, and and the refugee crisis that how the Boyan has described. I think the refugee crisis will not only trigger the more nationalist and anti-immigrant sentiments, not only in Poland. I think if the big number of people went to refugees, they decided to go to Germany or Holland or France or Britain, I think the ultra right, the nationalists, they will try to use the whip up the nationalism and try to, as the German far right did during when the Syrians went to Germany. So I think they will be waiting, and they will try to use it as the French presidential election are now very close. And if a big number of people, the immigrants, move to France, I think it will be, interesting to see, how the far right or the extreme right-wing forces will react to that, and how they will try to create a propaganda and all these things. I think this war will not only will hugely impact. Already the food prices are going up. Inflation is going up everywhere almost. There's serious threats to the world economy. Whatever recovery was there, now it's under question. And we have to see, how things, it will not only affect the region, but I think in a wider world perspective, I think this war will have a much wider impact on the different aspects. And also, I think what is happening at the moment in in Ukraine, whatever will be the outcome, I think in the medium, the short term, I think the more right wing, extreme right wing or right wing forces will be strengthened. In the short period, there's a situation that is developing around Ukraine. So that's really, yeah. Okay, that's what.
Thanks very much. That's I think I raised a lot of questions there. Perhaps I could ask a comrade from Britain, Roy. Would you be willing to come in and say a few words? What you're thinking?
Yes, yeah, of course would, Pat. Yeah. Picking up from what Boyan said about the quality of the politicians in Poland, I don't think that's restricted to Poland. I think it's almost worldwide. We've got Liz Truss, our foreign secretary, going and speaking around the world as if she knows anything about anything. She didn't understand the geography of Ukraine and Russia for a start. She was telling Parliament or a reporter that she welcomed our British people going over to fight in Ukraine, which is illegal in Britain. And I think that's, we've got they get away with lying now. Boris Johnson's like a multiple liar, but he still gets elected. The president of the United States is like a robot. I think that is a big problem, not only for the fact that they're able to be winning the propaganda war at the moment, but we're up against it in getting the narrative across on what's really happening and what are the reasons for this war and whose responsibility it is. And I'm watching Putin talking about what their demands were when he's speaking to the United Nations and when he was doing his press conferences. And he was kind of, you could see him completely frustrated, saying, I'm going to say this one more time. This is a red line for us. And in spite of what they've been saying of what that Putin is, is unstable, or he wants to rule the world and all the rest of it. The reality was, I mean, he's a bit old school. He was putting simple, basic demands based on the fact that NATO had been not even disbanded, but expanded. That the Americans, as we all know, undermined the government of Ukraine anyway, as they are doing around the world. We should come back to that discussion, I think. Where was I? Oh yeah, so the demands, wanted a demilitarization and a neutral. I mean, that was a simple demand. It wasn't a difficult one, I don't think. And some sort of self-organization for the Donbass regions. I think that was easily negotiable, except the fact is that the American interference, and as it's done all around the world, and this bullshit about sovereignty when they themselves pay no attention to sovereignty whatsoever, do things illegally. I mean, even was reading even the fact that they are pushing weapons into Ukraine. It is itself an infringement of the United Nations regulations because it's a threatening act, and so the right wing. Can you go out? I'm talking. I'm speaking.
Roy, was that one of your kids? Was that one of your grandchildren? Was it?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, where was I? The narrative that we're not being able to get across at the moment, even though there's a fair number left to understanding the issue of the United States going for its world domination. It's got hundreds of military bases all around the world where it's got no real interest and shouldn't really be there. It's undermining, it's bombed and destroyed many countries. It's fought proxy wars, and when we read now about the way the CIA and its sort of public face, the national, what was it, NED, is pouring billions of money into countries all around the world with the attempt to regime change. When you look at it in that context, you can see what's going on in Ukraine. And of course, give the Chinese their credit. In the recent statement they make, they say that very thing, that people shouldn't interfere in a sovereign state, exactly, which is what the Americans do all the time. And I think it is building up to a big, I'm not necessarily going to say confrontation, but there's a division between the global south and the west in what their understanding of these things are. And in particular with the the sanctions that have been put on, which are illegal as well, and they're having devastating effects. But you know, that's pushing Russia and China closer together. All the, you know, it's interesting when someone was saying the other day that you know, all these countries in Africa and they've never ever been invaded by China or Russia, particularly China. You know, and I think that they'll all be looking to think, well, bloody hell, you know, if we don't watch out, we're going to get sanctions, you know. And I think it's going to, and already because of the size and the advance of the Chinese economy, the East is getting together economically and gradually politically, and even doing military exercises together. You know, I think that will hopefully shine some light on what the West is doing, what particularly the United States is doing, and I think and I agree with, and I sort of talked about what Brian said, and I'll finish on what he said as well about the worry of these people who are in charge, that it doesn't seem Zelensky, again, whatever his name is, he's not in charge of any of these negotiations. You know, that's why the Russians, I think, have been insisting that it's only negotiations with them and Ukraine, nobody else. But interestingly enough, I was listening to Liz Truss again, our wonderful Foreign Secretary, speaking to the Atlantic Council. Two things she said was, one, this is a war we must win. We must win, not what Ukraine must win. This is a war we must win. And then a bit further down the line, she said, this could be a long haul, or words to that effect. In other words, thinking it will be carrying on. So the big worry is that that this will, and again, is what Brian said, that they're not going to let it go. The US is not going to give up, and they'd rather see the country destroyed or destabilized and the continuation of a war. And who knows what might come of that. But so, you know, unfortunately, I think in the left, there's been so much condemnation of the war and the Russian intervention that the side of the argument that who's to blame for this and what the strategy of the United States is and what it will do at any costs to any country that dares to not agree with what it wants to do. So, you know, so anyway, I think I'll finish there. I think I've said enough.
All right, Roy. Thanks very much. Yeah, that was a lot of good points there, Roy. I think I'm sure we all agree that the understanding what's caused this war and who's to blame for it. I mean, incidentally, on that, I don't know if the comrades had the chance. I think I posted up in the forum that, you know, the top experts on Russia and before it the Soviet Union in America are all opposed to this war and are all opposed to not just the war, but all opposed to the expansion of NATO and the strategy that's been followed by their own government for the last 30 years. But of course, they're now all out of the picture in terms of, you know, I'm talking about like Kissinger and Cohen and Kennan and Matlock, and these were the top people who actually crafted the US's strategy towards the Soviet Union, and they all disagree with the way Russia's been treated in this thing, and they say openly that America's to blame. But having said all that, I think we'd all agree that doesn't, understanding the situation doesn't excuse the invasion, because actually Russia could have done this in lots of different ways, and actually I think that events were moving in Russia's direction geopolitically, and it wasn't necessary for them to invade. And I think that this has caused a lot of, not only the loss of life and all the hardship that's causing people. But as I said earlier, all this carnival reaction, and it's boosted up. It might be only for a temporary period, but it's reunited Europe and America and NATO, and could even increase NATO's membership. As I think Stefan said about how there's pressure now for Sweden and Finland to join NATO. Whether or not all this will continue, it might be that how events move very quickly and mood changes. It could be that if Russia does win this war in the next couple of months, then that will change the way people will see this. And I will suspect that, in America, there's been a huge boost, well, not huge, but a significant boost to Biden's popularity right now, as there always is in a wartime situation. People kind of rally behind the leadership. But if the Russians win, and that will be seen as a loss, not just for Ukraine, but it will be seen as a loss for the West and for America. And I won't be surprised if the knives come out against Biden, and he will be seen as having lost Afghanistan, having lost Ukraine, and alongside it, having lost Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Russia, put them into the arms of the Chinese. And I won't be surprised if the knives come out for him, and we'll see this reflected in the elections in November. But we don't know exactly how this is all going to pan out, but that's I think a distinct possibility. One point I think on the left, one of the problems we've got is that there's a lot of conflicting principles involved in this war. Because you got the one where obviously we oppose one country invading another country in principle, and all the suffering that results from that. But they've got the conflicting principles, which, like Roy mentioned about, didn't he, where he talked about this in the United Nations Charter, which Americans are loudly proclaiming at the moment, and they went with that motion at the UN about. But there's a lot of other principles in that charter. For example, you're not allowed to threaten another country. And now a lot of people have said, they've tried to excuse their position by saying, well, Ukraine wasn't in NATO and there wasn't a likely chance of them joining in the near future anyway. But actually what was happening behind the scenes was that they were NATOizing Ukraine, even though it wasn't a member. So they were bringing in all the weapons, and they were helping them build up their own forces. The Americans and NATO's trainers were in there, training them in NATO methods, and they were doing NATO war games, which, by the way, the war games themselves were consciously set as being against Russia. So, of course, I don't know if any of you've heard this this thing called the security dilemma. It's some international relations theory, but it does make sense. Is that if you build up the arms, you're feeling threatened. Like you could argue the Ukrainians were feeling threatened, and if you build up your armed forces, it can have the opposite effect of what you want, because then the other side thinks you're becoming a threat, and then they start to build up their arms, and then it ratchets up and up. And we can see that in a way it's played out here in this conflict, isn't it? There's also as Roy pointed out, there's in the UN declaration, it says you're not allowed to subvert a country. You're not allowed to interfere in another country's politics. Well, we've seen that with the Americans, that they have poured large amounts of resources and tactics and money into Ukraine to subvert the government of Ukraine. So then they organized the 2004 Orange Revolution, they organized the 2014 Euro-Maiden coup, etc., etc. And Biden himself, as vice president under Obama, was allocated to be in charge of Ukraine, and he went there and he acted like a boss there, telling them what to do quite openly. I don't know if any of you've seen the videos of that, and how when he spoke to the Rada, Ukrainian parliament, he was just basically laying down the law, what they can do and what they can't do. So that's another principle UN that they've broken. And there are even more, like sanctions. Sanctions is against unless your sanctions have been authorized by the UN Security Council, it's illegal. And the reason is because sanctions kill people. I mean, it's not just, and sometimes sanctions kill more people than wars do. We saw that in Iran, for example, and we've seen that in Iraq. And you remember those 500,000 children who died from the sanctions before the second war with Saddam Hussein overthrew. So, you know, one of the ironies of these sanctions against Russia is that they have forced Russia to I mean, can you imagine the psychology of Russians at the moment? That the ordinary Russians didn't make they weren't involved in this decision by Putin to go into to the Ukraine. I mean, and let's be honest, you know, if the truth is told, we're talking about this Russian-Ukrainian conflict is that one set of right-wing oligarchs fighting another set of right-wing oligarchs, if the truth is told about these things. And when Putin made this decision, the ordinary Russian people weren't involved, and they were shocked and surprised when they heard the news. And yet these sanctions are against them. And look at the way that Russians, it's all turned into racism against Russians now in the West, where if you're Russian, you're sacked, you know, you're sacked off. You know, in Britain, we saw these dancers on Strictly Come Dancing. We've seen singers sacked, pianists, you name it. Anybody who's Russian is fair game. And whether they support this invasion or not, some of them are actually against it and have been openly against it, but still losing their positions. So can you imagine how the Russian people are reacting to seeing this outbreak of mass hysteria and racism sweeping across the Western world? And for example, an example of that was this crazy decision on the sanctions to ban Russians flying anywhere in the Western world. I mean, it comes across to Russians that the West is trying to cancel Russia and its civilization. And can you blame them for then saying, well, bugger that, we're turning our back on the West and we're facing towards Eurasia, Eurasian economies, China, and so on. And I think that this is going to have huge, long-lasting repercussions. The Russians are not going to forget this easily. And I think it's going to, you know, it's going to cause a massive shift, or is causing a massive shift in geopolitical relationships. And, you know, we've talked about this in the past, haven't we? I mean, some of you, I know there was, some of our Swedish comrades were not happy about me putting up this statement that was agreed between President Xi and Putin at the Winter Olympics a few weeks back. And I think they didn't understand that. I wasn't saying that everything in the statement was good. I wasn't saying that. I just thought it was important for the comrades to see the thinking that's going on now behind this geopolitical conflict in the world, and how things are changing so much, so that we can understand it better and we can orientate ourselves to this correctly. So that's just what my sort of tuppence into this discussion. All right, so now, Yen, I wondered if you might like to say something from sort of an African perspective, and what your thoughts are about all this. Yen, I don't know if you're there, and if you are, if you can unmute yourself. I know he was talking earlier. So.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, hello.
Ah, great. Well done. Yeah, great.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Africa in particular, and Ghana has been under the peril of the US and Western powers. So definitely our governments are pro the US, and they have issued statements. Our government in Ghana voted for the resolution against Russia, you know, but in terms of the depending upon whom you talk, and then depending on WhatsApp messages, people are seeing the double standards. And because of the Libyan situation, you know, Gaddafi is being seen high, the way in which Gaddafi was killed and bombed, you know, so people are making those connections. So it is not, though our leaders are very pro-West, there is this issue of, look at what the West also does. So if Russia does that, then why blame them? There is that issue. But nevertheless, nobody wants war, and we are all against war. But sometimes personally, what I don't understand is that the West won the Cold War. You won a war. So why do you have to expand eastwards? You know, and even when Russia was prepared to be part of that NATO, according to stories that we hear. But again, it is the issue of the weapons industry. What happens to them? This is a very critical issue. Chris Hedge from the US made that point absolutely clear that you see the beneficiaries of these wars, the NATO expansion, is the people in the arms industry. They are laughing all their way. But sometimes you just sit down and wonder what happens really to humankind. I mean, mankind, or humankind, not mankind. What happens to us? Because you have a situation in which you just building weapons to destroy yourself, and mistakes can be made. And the weapons industry are making quite a lot of money and all others. So those are some of the thoughts going through, you know. And then you've already mentioned the issue of the anti-Russia, you know. If there is a war going on, why attack ordinary Russians, you know, athletes and all other? It doesn't just make sense, you know. So that is the other issue. And there is this other issue of the by lap that the Americans themselves agreed that they got by laps in their destiny. So those are some of the issues. Yeah, definitely I am against war, and maybe Putin, but sometimes Putin should have invaded. Well, let's wait and see. I mean, the world, I mean, I don't want to be a pessimist, but I'll say that who is going to benefit more? You know, they have their yachts, they have their expensive wealth, and if they want to destroy the world, then we'll all go. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. Very, very. At that point you're making about the you know, the military-industrial, the arms manufacturers. You know, they call the military-industrial complex. I don't know if any of you follow that guy, Chris Hedges, online. He brought out a very good point last week, where he was in Eastern Europe in 1989 onwards, in that period when you know, they all left the Soviet bloc and switched over to capitalist counter-revolutions took place. And he said that he noticed that there are all these arms manufacturer salesmen wandering around, getting very excited. And the reason was because all these countries, this was not really a grassroots demand. It was a demand of the elites. They wanted the arms manufacturers in America in particular, but also Germans and French and so on, that they wanted the Eastern European countries to join NATO because they would make a fortune. Because what it meant was that all the Warsaw Pact equipment would have to be junked, because when you join NATO, you have to change all your military equipment over to be compatible with the rest of the NATO members. And also one of the rules is that you have to buy your weapons from NATO members. So they were salivating at the hundreds of billions of dollars that they could make from this huge changeover of military equipment. And what they were doing was they were bribing the top civil servants in these countries, their military officers, politicians and so on, and bringing them to conferences and doing, you know, holidays and all kinds of things they were doing, to persuade them to push through a demand to join NATO in their countries so they could make a huge fortune. And of course, this, on a larger scale, you remember that famous speech by Eisenhower, his last speech that he gave in, I guess it would have been 1960 or 61, and which he warned America about the military-industrial complex. And in fact, the original draft of his speech, which he was persuaded to amend, was the military industrial congressional complex, and by which he meant that the Pentagon in America and all the big arms manufacturers had got all the main politicians in Congress in their pocket, financially and otherwise. You know, they were using straight, you know, donations, but also they were placing their bases, military bases in particular states that brought employment and income to the states, and they were using that as a bargaining chip as well. And so as a result, they now got a situation where if you look at the industrial base of America, I saw some statistics on that recently. The arms industry, you know, the industrial base of America has dramatically been reduced, but the arms industry is way over proportion to the rest of the industry of America. And they basically constantly want war or the threat of war. So of course they use their control of the Congress to push this all the time. And so I think Yen is right that this is a major factor behind the often self-destructive foreign policy that America pursues, you know, because obviously if you look at, it's not just the military budget of nearly $1 trillion every year, but it's the trillions they spend on each war. That means damages the American economy and prevents them spending money on other things like research and development, science and technology and so on. And so, of course, that's totally fatally undermining the whole American economy, but they don't care. They're making their, these arms companies are making their profits, and the politicians that are in their pocket are making their, you know, keeping their status and wealth and power. So it's, I think that what Yen talked about there is very true. Okay, now we've got several other Pakistani comrades here. I wonder if they wanted to come in, and I don't know if Kabir or Altaf wanted to say anything. Would you like to contribute? Trying to make sure everybody gets a say in this session. I don't know if their connection is okay. Altaf, did you want to say? Ah, Kabir, great.
Thank you, comrade. I think comrades raised very important points. First of all, we cannot even imagine the peace on this planet while the capitalism is existing, because of course this is a system, but in this system, as Pat, you have pointed out, that the individual's interest determine the things. As even though the future and the fate of the American imperialism is on stake right now, because as the power is going to be shift from the west to the east, and we are seeing this very rapidly. Things are changing, alignments are changing, old relations are going to be broken up, and new relations are building up right now. And the things are rapidly changing, but the shift which we expect and which we are seeing on the horizon right now, that cannot be so smooth, as the decline of the American imperialism is going on, and the economic power of the China and the weaponry power of the Russia, if they both join together, and even that might not be the intention of both of the states to join with each other, but the material ground and the powers dominating the world, they are pushing both of the states to join each other. And of course, that shift which is going to be taken place right now, that will cause the distractions as well, that cannot be so smooth. So the war or the invasion of the Russia on the Ukraine, that is not, we cannot look that issue in isolation. Of course, there are many and multiple reasons behind that. And one of the reason which we have discussed over here, many comrades pointed out those issues as well, that even though we cannot support the war, whatever the state is invading the other state, but invasion of the Russia, if we see that, in my view, Russian state was compelled and forced to invade the Ukraine, even though we see the humanitarian destruction, which Khaled and many other comrades have pointed out, that many people of the Ukraine, they are compelled and they have been forced by the situation, by the war, to migrate to the European states right now, even though the destruction is there. And secondly, the impact of this war will be in shape of the economic decline, the economic crisis as well, the price hike as already we are facing, and already the pandemic was going on and the destruction was going on due to the pandemic, and economic crisis was going on due to the pandemic. Before the pandemic, there was a global economic recession and economy was in decline and in crisis already. And now the invasion of the Russia and Ukraine and Russian war will affect the global economy as well. And the price hike and unemployment and such issues will rapidly raise globally. But I think that the Russian state was being tried by the US and the European imperialist powers to curtail in a particular circle, and that they were trying to restrict the Russian influence. And that as we already have discussed that even though the Ukraine was not the part of the NATO, but they were supporting the Ukraine to empower or to influence the NATO forces on the border of the Russia. And that was the situation which caused or which compelled or which invited or provoked the Russian ruling class to invade the Ukraine, to put its influence. Even though this one is a drastic and very destructive image which we are seeing right now. But the question is, if the Russians succeed in this war, what would be the future of the US imperialism being an imperialist power? And many left organizations were presenting the perspective of the Third World War. What do we think that is there any chance of the Third World War? Because if such war, the war like Russia and Ukraine, that provoke the NATO forces and other all forces, all of the imperialist powers to be involved in such war. Can there be a third world war? What do we expect for such things? So later on, the points which may come in my mind, I'll share later on. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kabir. So I think the sound was going a bit there at the end, but I think you posed the question of what other comrades thought about, the possibility of a third world war. I don't know. Altaf, would you like to say anything about that? Have you got any thoughts about it?
Thank you, comrade. And I don't think so. I have any point to raise, but I think that the war and the new blocks, China and Russia, and also there is something fishy in overall international relations. So I will wait for some concrete points. I think so. There is a weakness overall on the left side that we are not resisting the war. Who invade whom or what? But the business of gun and fires is not accessible for humanity. Also not better for the world relations and the democracy. So I think so that on this side of the topic, I need some more points from you comrades, because there is nothing in international media who is clearly as Comrade Khalid pointed out, who is clearly show the picture what is happened and why, and who is responsible for this. And also, I think so we should have to discuss the future of the world and the future of the capitalism also. I think, and in my view, this is the point where capitalism should take a shift. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks Altaf for your short contribution there. Yeah, Boyan, definitely come back, go for it.
Right, thanks. Unfortunately, in about half an hour, I will have to go because I've got another recording at 7
Sure.
p.m. my time, and I need some time to prepare for that. So well, first of all, I want to thank everyone for those interventions. I think some great ideas and points were made, and I'm obviously not going to be able to comment on all of them, despite the fact that I would like to. But a few important elements here. Like, first is the question of, because there seems to be the kind of back and forth here, okay, that like whether this war is justified or not justified, whether the Russian state was compelled to wage it or not. And on the one hand, we've got this, and Pat, you pointed out in the beginning of the meeting that like there are these contradicting elements of the international law, but there are also some contradicting sentiments, I think, within the left, so to say. And I just want to present perhaps, and I'm not defending that war, and I don't think it's justified, and I like you, Pat, I think that there were other options, although I admit that it might be the case that we don't know everything, and I just want to say that despite the fact that Putin, okay, he's right-wing, he's conservative, and oligarchic capitalism, blah blah blah, and all the rest of it, that's true, but we gotta acknowledge, I think, that the Russians, they've got some very smart people running their show, actually. And in comparison to, for example, the European leaders, when I come to think, and when I come to compare, like, I don't know, people like Lavrov or Shoigu or, Putin or Michurin, if we come to compare them to this, I don't even know how to describe this person, like Josep Borrell. He's just a walking disaster. Okay, he should resign. He should have resigned a long time ago. He's like, or what Roy mentioned, this woman Liz Truss, right? Like she's obviously not up to for that job. So this is something that I think we should acknowledge. Like, those people, they're not the Trumps, they're not the Bidens, they're not the Liz Trusses. They are a bit of a different class of people, and they are very old school, and they don't like this PR marketing, these games. They are just, they don't bluff, for example. And that's something that I don't quite understand why the West somehow is unable to grasp the very fact that Putin doesn't bluff. He doesn't do that. And, the actions show that. I think Roy pointed it out that, okay, it was someone else, sorry, Mike Raman, right? This is our red line. This is our guys. Come on, this is our red line. You cross it, we bomb you. Like he didn't say that, like word for word, but that was pretty much the message that they were conveying. And it's happening. It's playing out right now. And still, they think like, okay, let's go for a no-fly zone, whatever. They're bluffing about the nuclear weapons or whatever else. So there's that. And then there's the second thing, which I think we should all kind of understand, is how the Russians perceive that, because there's another back and forth here, whether Russia is being imperialist, whether this is an imperialist conflict between imperialist powers and so on and so forth. I want to say that I don't agree with the description of Russia in this context as being an imperialist power, and I don't want to dive into this theoretical discussion right now, but I want to indicate this. And for the comrades to just have, I'm not trying to influence your position on this. I'm just giving you an idea of how the Russian people and the Russian elite see the situation. Because for many people in the West, this is just like, okay, there's one country, there's the neighboring country, and then one country invaded the other country, which is neighboring. And that is not how the Russians see that. The Russians see that in a historical context and in a social and cultural, if you like, civilizational context. I don't like this Russian crap about how they are a separate civilizational project, but they see that this way, like, or many of them tend to see that this way. Now, for them, historically speaking, it's almost a civil war, okay? Because they really truly believe in that, and there is a foundation to this, that they are the same people, not necessarily the same nation, but the same cultural sphere, the same civilizational territory, the same understanding, perception of the world, and so on and so forth. And historically speaking, Russia does really consist of three parts. That's historically, that's facts. The greater Russia, which is more or less, okay, with all the simplifications, the territory of the Russian Federation today. Then there's White Russia, which is Belarus. Belarus in Russian means literally White Russia. And then there's Lesser Russia, which is pretty much the eastern part of Ukraine until the Dnieper River, and with Odessa close to Transnistria. That used to be Russia, the whole of it, for the whole of the modern history. All right, and then all kinds of historical shifts have occurred, and this Ukraine as a sort of ethnic and state and as a kind of entity of that kind emerged really around like in the early early 20s is like a little earlier than that, but at the break of the 20th century. Okay, this is when people started to speak about Ukraine as some kind of entity that could be compared with other states or emerging states or ethnic ethnonyms, as they call it. So this is, and there was a huge discussion, by the way, whether this should be acknowledged, because the Bolsheviks were pressing for that, because they had this idea, which is a very good idea, of course, of the self-determination of nations. But there were many communists, including Bulgarian communists, for example, one Christian Rakovsky. There are his works available in English, and he criticized that. He was really very, very critical against recognition of this Ukrainian concept of Ukrainism, and he warned already back then what kind of dangers it could bring about. So, for the Russians, it's something else. It's not like, they are invading, like the Americans are invading Iraq or the Americans invading Afghanistan. This is not comparable in terms of their perception of this. And also, they believe, and they genuinely believe, I tell you that, they genuinely believe. I've been to Russia many times. I've got friends there, and I've spoken to them, before the war started, of course, obviously. And I've got business partners in Russia, obviously not anymore, probably. I mean, I haven't been doing business with them over the last 2 years, but now, even if it was in place, it probably would have been impossible. But what I'm trying to say is they are in right now in their understanding to protect one Ukrainians against other Ukrainians. This is how they see this, the dynamics of this conflict. So, to claim that this is like a cynical invasion, that they just want to have a buffer zone and a sphere of influence. Of course, there's an element of that, obviously, because Russia has been devoid of its entire buffer zone after 1989, and then subsequently NATO expanded to eastwards, and all those things happened. And the cynical element in the whole puzzle here, in my opinion, is the final calculus that was used to decide whether this war is going to be waged or not. And the calculus, in my opinion, I don't have any internal information. I can only base myself on everything that on things that are a matter of public record. But if you see the commentaries in the Russian media, if you see the reaction of the Russian politicians, if you see all those things, okay, that are all those processes that are playing out in the Russian public arena, you will see that there's a general consensus that, okay, we of course did not want this war, because, waging war on our own people, which is how they perceive it, is an act of absolute, not last resort. It's a desperate resort. It's like the nuclear option, okay? So we don't want to do that, but then we're looking at this. We're looking at the coup in 2014. We're looking at the constant war, something that is absent from the media, constant war against the peoples of the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, shelling and all kinds of military maneuvers, deadly maneuvers, 14,000 people killed over the period of 80 years, and Russia trying to sort this out diplomatically. They came together in 2015 with France and with Germany and with Russia and Ukraine, the Minsk Accords, the Normandy format, and for 8 straight years, Russia has been patiently waiting, trying to get people to the table, trying to make them afterwards to put pressure on Ukraine to adhere to its end of those Minsk agreements and all the rest of it. Never happened. And meanwhile, the NATO-fying or as NATOization of Ukraine continued, like tens of thousands of regular troops and mercenaries and advisors and trainers and whatnot, right? What have you. And even the British, I think, were attempting to start building a naval military base or something like that. I never verified this information, I'm sorry. But anyway, big things were going on. Okay, and I think that the cynical calculus here was, okay, we either go in and take it down right now, or we're going to be forced to do that anyway in some 5 years' time, for example, and it's going to be much more difficult. I think, again, this is just a speculation here on my end, but that's probably that's my guess on how the situation. On how this train of thought developed, and now when you see those things happening, like the bio labs, I don't know how much truth there is to it really, but I suppose, considering that Victoria Nuland actually admitted that there are chemical bio research facilities, and she did admit that on record, okay. Are there, and she's so afraid that Russians are going to put their dirty hands on the research conducted in those bio labs, that means something fishy is being, I don't know, produced or processed there, right? If she's so afraid, if it had only been, some regular facilities for scientific purposes, why would she be so preoccupied with that? And of course, that leads me to another point, which is a little bit off tangent here, that I'm kind of, observing the discussions about those bio labs and how they evolved into a chemical weapons threat, and those staged questions and answers between journalists and Jem Psaki and this moron who's the I forgot that. The guy who's the spokesman for the Pentagon, okay, between him and journalists about the chemical weapons, potential application or use of chemical weapons by Russians, and then I think even Joe Biden was asked that question, and he said there's going to be terrible consequences and all the rest of it. I'm afraid we might be seeing sometime in the near future some sort of Duma version 2.0 event, like, you know, they're going to create a huge scandal throughout the international media, how Putin is killing the poor Ukrainian people with chemical weapons. And of course, that's going to fit into the narrative that's being spun right now, which is the Russians are losing big time. You know, they're retreating, they're demoralized, they're running away, and, you know, the Ukrainian forces are taking over from the Russians, you know, one town, one village, one city after another that has been occupied until now. So I just wanted to make those points, and I also wanted to ask a question here, whether perhaps you, Pat, or anyone else, whereas there is whether you think that there could be some kind of coming to terms with reality on the part of the West, or coming to terms with rational thinking. Because, you know, what I'm really afraid of here, and I said that in my first intervention, is the West is going to do something really stupid, and they seem to act only and exclusively on emotion. I mean, they really want to stick it to the Russians now. Like, how could they? It's us, you know, it's the West. We are supposed to be invading other countries and expand our spheres of influence and so on and so forth. And I think that it has such a bad impact on their own psychology that, you know, they now, okay, they dropped the atomic bomb of sanctions. I don't think you can come up with any more sanctions, really. Maybe a blockade or something like that, like in the case of Cuba, but I think it would be impossible, provided the territorial, provided
geography.
How big. Yeah, geography. Thank you. Yes. So provided geography, but you know, they've done this, and they seem to be now maybe realizing to some extent that they're shooting themselves in the foot, or maybe somewhere higher. But you know, now it's too late. Now it's like, okay, the decoupling has started, and it's probably gonna, you know, continue. I don't see how anything's going to go back on track. But do you think they will at one moment understand what they are actually doing? Because, you know, us here in Eastern Europe, at least, we can only count on their decisions being a little more rational, and we depend on them, okay, on the West, on what the Russians like to call the collective West. Our governments in Poland, in Bulgaria, in Romania, we have no agency. We are not even allowed to take a position. The Bulgarian Minister of Defense, the former, actually, he was asked to resign because he's a former general, like the Bulgarian president, by the way. They were very, very they were very intensely protesting the decisions that were taken on the part of the West and forced on Bulgaria to apply, and they had to resign. They had to resign because you know, they were not obedient enough, and they understand, because they're generals. They understand what war means exactly. Okay, so I wonder whether you like, you know, in the past, we used to have some European leaders. We might have liked their policies or not, but they were big people, like, I don't know, Helmut Kohl or Charles de Gaulle, or, you know, I mean, people that we don't like them, okay, because they are right wing, or Willy Brandt for that matter, because he was more like social democratic. But they were real statesmen, and they were people thinking about like what the reactions could be to the actions that they take, and they were like thinking in some kind of terms which I would argue are rational, at least to some extent. Okay, and those people have either lost their minds, or maybe, that's also a question, are ideologues. Maybe they are just doctrinaire, thick-headed idiots that think that, you know, we have to do whatever is possible in order to restrain Russia and China, because they are the barbaric East and we are the civilized West. So that's what I want.
Okay, fine. Well, I think the question you're posing there is such a big one that probably what would be best would be for us to have another meeting on that subject to talk about the new, you know, the balance of power between the different forces on the planet, how that's shaping up, and what perspective, you know, the conflict between China, Russia, Eurasia, and the Western imperialists, and what perspectives that would lead us to have for the next 10, 15 years. I think that's a very important debate and discussion we need to have. And maybe if the comrades are happy about that, we should, because we're running out of time now. maybe we should have that as our next discussion in a couple of months' time, where we'll know more about how this conflict with Ukraine is shaping up, and maybe it'll come to an end by then. And then we can see how that's all shaking out, and whether who's won the conflict, or if it's still ongoing. So if I think that you've posed such a big question there that we can't do it now in the last few minutes.
All right.
Yeah, sorry about that. But I do think it is perhaps the key question we need to think about. Everybody's has been able to have a say in the meeting, which I think is great. And I think our discussions reflected that, hasn't it? That we've got very interesting different points of view come up with. Hasn't been able to cover, I'm sure, every question, but I think it certainly covered a lot of them. And I don't know about the other comrades, but I thought it's been a great session, and one of our best, perhaps. I don't know. And I'm thank everybody for participating and putting their tuppence in there, and it's made a very good, result. Okay, I think we're coming to the last few minutes. If there's anybody who wants to, I see Manzoor has joined us. Well, Manzoor, unfortunately, if you can hear us, we've had a great discussion with lots of comrades contributing, which unfortunately you've missed. But if you'd like to come in and give us some thoughts about how you see the war in Ukraine and the causes or the implications of it, that would be very good. Manzoor, can you hear us? If so, then unmute yourself if you'd like to say something. Even though you missed a lot of the meeting, I think it would be very good to have your input. I don't know if Manzoor can hear us. He's coming on through his phone, so it might be difficult for him to. Sajjad, perhaps you would like to say something, because we haven't heard anything from you. Sorry?
I hear the whole discussion.
Okay. Good, Sajjad. Yeah. So, could you say something? What your thoughts are about the situation?
That situation, I think we are as a socialist, we have to always against the war, but what is going on there, they like to change their laws in their assembly and like to go towards NATO or European Union, and that was I think not acceptable to Russia, because at the time of separation the mutual understanding that nobody will stand against the each ex-Soviet Union state, and this is the main reasons which started this war. What the position we have taken, we have against the war, and we have also against the NATO and Americans and European Union, who are provoked this war. Only this little point I like to raise. What will be happen? I can't predict, because in my opinion, this war should be very small, but it will still continue. And if it will continue, its impacts will be more and more, and it causes so many effects on world politics and each and everything. As we are getting here, the problem with the fuel oil, fossil oil rates increase, and inflation is also going to increase everywhere. So if it will increase more, then the problems becomes more and more sharp everywhere. That's all from my side.
Okay, Sajjad, thanks. We are having a bit of problems with the sound there, but I think I managed to just about work out what you were saying. I think most comrades did, so that was good. As to perhaps just to finish off before we last 2 or 3 minutes, I don't want us to finish off on too gloomy an ending about the about the possibility of a third world war and even a nuclear war. Clearly, there are some people, especially in the American foreign policy establishment, who appear to sound like they would like to have NATO forces militarily intervene and to have a big fight, and actually to have the big fight with Russia, which would be a third world war. But so far I can see, I don't think that they have the majority of the ruling class in America and Europe behind them. And that could change, but we have to assume that the ruling class have got some rationality here. And therefore that's not the most likely perspective, and even less so of a nuclear war. But who knows with these the shifting balance of power that's going on. Certainly that seems to be what the Ukrainians themselves, the government of the Ukraine, is pushing for all the time with all these. They seem to be hyping up all the news in Ukraine, so accusing the Russians of, first of all, attacking a nuclear power station, which turned out to be rubbish, and that the Russians are, committing genocide. I mean, unfortunately, it's genocide. This word genocide is thrown around all the time, isn't it? Which is a bit of an insult in my mind of the actual people who suffered from real genocides. And they're trying to say that the Russians are, deliberately targeting hospitals and so on, which I think the reality is it's more likely to be that these weapons, even though they claim, the Americans and the Russians claim that these Russians are very highly targeted and so on, but you can see that a lot of them go in the wrong place. And this is the reality. This is the effect of warfare. Even, but it used to always be the effect of warfare, but even modern way of warfare, a lot of rockets, bombs, and so on end up in the wrong. They don't hit the targets they're aiming for, and they end up hitting civilian targets. So I think that the propaganda against the Russians is extreme, and I think over exaggerated, as is all the speeches of Zelensky, are geared to the PR effect they can have. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to influence the public in the West to put pressure on their leaders to make them intervene, and there to be, because I think the Ukrainians realize that despite all the propaganda, that they can't win this war with Russia, and that slowly but surely the Russians will overcome them. And so therefore they can't win on a military basis. So they're trying to use public relations to get the Western powers to intervene militarily. And that's the only hope they have in winning this war. And of course, they don't seem to care that the fact that this will massively escalate the whole conflict and probably destroy Ukraine. I don't know what the strategy, why they're following the strategy. It doesn't make any sense, and so as Boyan said, maybe they'll try, like they did in Syria, a kind of fake chemical war attack to kind of shock and horrify the Western public to the point where the politicians will launch a war, will get involved either through a no-fly zone or military troops in Ukraine. But hopefully that won't happen, and then it won't escalate further. but we don't know. We're not in control of these things. I mean, I would say that we on the left should be raising high the demand for a ceasefire. It's very strange, isn't it, that this demand is not being raised generally on the left and in the media, which one would think, that was the demand that the revolutionaries raised in the First World War in 1915 in the Zimmerwald movement. They demanded the immediate cessation of hostilities and a negotiated peace with no victors. And that's, I think that logically the demand we on the left should raise in this situation, but doesn't seem to be coming forward. I'm not sure why no one on the left is putting that forward. But anyway, let's hope that this doesn't escalate and that the war comes to an end as soon as possible. And then on that base, maybe we as a network, we can discuss the outcome of the war and what the shape of future perspectives with the changing world balance of power. That would be, I think, a very important next session of the network that we could hold. Okay, comrades, we've done 2 hours, just under, and I'm not going to call in anybody else. I'm sorry, because otherwise we'll have to. It could go on for too long. But I'd like to thank everybody who's participated, and what I think has been a really good discussion. And we'll put the video up online for those who haven't been able to come on board. It's a shame we weren't able to get the Swedish comrades, more of them to participate, but we wish them well in their discussion tomorrow, and hopefully some of these points they might find useful in their discussion. Okay, any points comrades need to come in terms of organization about the session or anything? If not, I'll thank everybody for participating and say goodbye to everybody. Thank them very much for coming in. Brilliant. Okay, comrades.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.